In the NFL, there are poverty franchises and the elite individuals that investigate them. These are their stories. This is Law and Order, Poverty Franchises Unit.
Boom, yesterday, FBI raids Alan Williams, former defense coordinator of the Chicago Bears house. And then also, Halas Hall got raided by the FBI. And it was
the Bears.
Just here to do a Super Bowl show.
The Bears. The Bears. The Bears.
The Chicago Bears. You might know them as a modern NFL dumpster fire. But did you know they're one of the most historic and legendary NFL franchises? They were founded in 1920, and they have 9 NFL championships, including a Super Bowl victory in 1986. They have the record for the most NFL Hall of Fame enshrinees and retired jersey numbers. They have the second most victories in NFL history, only behind their arch rival, the Green Bay Packers. They have had legendary Hall of Fame players throughout their history, including the monsters of the Midway, Walter Payton, Sid Luckman, Mike Singletary, Devin Hester, Dick Butkus, Red Grange, Brian Urlacher, legendary, iconic NFL player. So how did this historic NFL franchise go from a legendary organization to a perennial doormat and NFL laughingstock? In order to truly understand how the Chicago Bears got to this point, we first have to look into their history. And first things first, we have to start with George Halas. You can't tell the story of the Chicago Bears without George Halas. George Halas is the Chicago Bears' legendary founder, owner, player, and coach. He played and coached while selling tickets for the Chicago Bears in the 1930s. He also convinced star running back Red Grange to play for the Bears in the first place. From 1930 to 1940, the Chicago Bears won 6 NFL championships under George Halas, including a 73-0 victory over the Washington Redskins in the 1940 NFL championship, which still stands today as the NFL record for largest margin of victory. He also introduced the T formation, which allowed the Bears to dominate as much as they did. And they became known as the Monsters of the Midway because of just how imposingly dominant the Chicago Bears were under George Halas. George Halas has an impeccable resume as a Chicago Bear founder, owner, and player. He had 63 years as an owner, 40 years as a coach. He had a 324 and 148 record as a coach, and 8 NFL championships. I don't think it's a stretch to say that George Halas is synonymous with the Chicago Bears. So let's take a look at the last time the Chicago Bears were respectable and dominant. The 1985 Chicago Bears are regarded as one of the most dominant NFL teams in history. They had a 15-1 regular season record led by head coach Mike Ditka and defensive coordinator Buddy Ryan, with his now famous 46 defense. The defense was otherworldly. They gave up 12.4 points per game and led the NFL in takeaways with 54. They had dominant, all-time great players, running back Walter Payton, their left tackle Jimbo Covert, linebacker Mike Singletary, and they had 3 dominant playoff games en route to a Super Bowl victory, including 2 shutouts in the playoffs, which culminated in a 46-10 victory over the New England Patriots. In the playoffs, they won their games by a margin of 71-10, and they only gave up 10 points in the Super Bowl. That's insane. They are one of the most dominant teams in NFL history. But like I said, that's the last time they were truly dominant and respectable. So why is that? What was going on behind the scenes in Halas Hall up in Chicago? Well, there was an internal power struggle. George Halas had intended to pass his presidency and ownership of the Bears onto his son, George Muggsy Halas, in 1963. And then Muggsy died suddenly, though, of a heart attack in 1979. So George Halas's daughter, Virginia, got sole ownership of the team when George Halas passed away in 1983. However, looking at an autopsy of George Muggsy Halas, remember George Halas's son, who was supposed to get ownership when George Halas died, the doctors found that he had no organs and his body was filled with sawdust. Yeah, he had a heart attack. So there's a lot of speculation that Virginia had something to do with her brother's death in order to gain sole ownership of the Chicago Bears. With the ownership power struggle finally over in 1983, following George Halas's death, his daughter, Virginia Halas, now McCaskey, gained full control of the Chicago Bears organization. And despite them winning the Super Bowl 2 years later in 1985, this new ownership is where cracks really start to show themselves as blatant mismanagement for the Chicago Bears. Walter Payton is one of the most iconic Chicago Bears in their illustrious history. He's second all-time in rushing yards with 16,726, and he's fifth all-time in rushing touchdowns with 110. While George Halas is the most symbolic figurehead of the Bears, Walter Payton, you can make a serious argument, is the most iconic player associated with the Chicago Bears. And he was a 9-time Pro Bowler. He won the NFL MVP. He was the Offensive Player of the Year. And he never asked for anything in his entire career with the Bears, which was from 1975 to 1987, except for one thing. This man desperately wanted to score a touchdown in the Super Bowl, more than anything. And instead of allowing their best, most iconic player to get his wish in a 46-10 blowout, by the way, over the New England Patriots, head coach Mike Ditka sent in William the Refrigerator Perry, a defensive lineman, to score a touchdown at the goal line. You could have sent him in to block for Walter Payton, but no, you gave him the ball instead. And after the game, despite the Bears winning 46-10, it was reported that Walter Payton was by himself crying as if they had lost because he didn't get the one thing he'd always wanted. The Bears couldn't give their best player the only thing he ever asked for, which was to score a touchdown in a Super Bowl blowout. That is horrid mismanagement. Most organizations will give their best players what they want. They'll give them what they want to a certain extent. It's not too much to ask for their best player to want to score a touchdown in the biggest game of his life. But no, the Bears had to go and screw that up, mismanage, really hurt their best player, in all honesty. They hurt him. They really hurt Walter Payton. They hurt Sweetness. And that is where the beginning of the end really starts to come to fruition. During the 1980s, the Chicago Bears were dominant and respected. The 1990s was the complete opposite. The Bears fired head coach Mike Ditka, who won them the 1985 Super Bowl following the 1992 season. He has 106 wins, and that's the second most wins in Bears history, only to George Halas. But the Bears thought they could do better than Ditka. They wanted to go in a different direction. But they were sadly, horribly mistaken. From 1993 to 2004, the Chicago Bears had 2 playoff appearances and no playoff wins. So in 11 years, they went to the playoffs twice and had no playoff win. But things started to look up after 2004 when they hired Lovie Smith. Lovie Smith kind of brought the Bears back to their roots, playing great defense and having awesome special teams with Devin Hester. Lovie Smith took them to the Super Bowl in 2006, but they lost to the Indianapolis Colts and Peyton Manning 29-17. And really, the only highlight for the Bears that whole game was when Devin Hester returned the opening kickoff for a touchdown. Other than that, it was all Colts. And a big reason for the Bears, I guess, lack of success. A big reason for the Bears' lack of success is the fact that they have been in quarterback hell for really their entire existence as a franchise. The year they went to the Super Bowl in 2006, they had Rex Grossman, who on the season threw 23 touchdowns, but 20 interceptions. And in the Super Bowl, he was 20 of 28 for 165 yards, 1 touchdown, 2 interceptions, and he also fumbled the ball twice. And just to kind of add insult to injury, the Bears are the only team in NFL history to never have a 4,000-yard passer at quarterback for a single season.
Bruh.
I expect the 7-10 Bears, with better quarterbacking, more talent, not the dead cap that have been weighing down the last 2 years, to be a 10 or 11 win team. Ooh. So I expect them to make the playoff.
Bears receivers are going to have the most TD catches in the NFL this year.
No. Come on.
They've got 3 of the best. You could say they've got the best wide receiver core in the NFL.
But I will set what my expectations are. I think the Bears are going to win 10-plus games next year, and I would be shocked if by the end of his 3rd year, he is not considered the best quarterback in his conference, and I would bet money that before the end of his rookie contract, they play in a Super Bowl.
They've been trying to get the quarterback position right for a long, long time, but they have continued to fail miserably. In 2017, they traded up 1 spot with the San Francisco 49ers to draft quarterback Mitch Trubisky. And they didn't have to trade up because the 49ers were going to take Solomon Thomas anyway. They didn't have to give up all that draft capital. And then they also passed on both Patrick Mahomes and Deshaun Watson that draft. They drafted Mitch Trubisky over Patrick Mahomes and Deshaun Watson. If that doesn't show you that an organization doesn't know what a good starting quarterback is, I don't know what will. Like the Chicago Bears, a huge part of their failures in recent memory is because they can't have good quarterback. They don't know what they look like. They've tried and they've failed miserably. They just can't get the quarterback position right. So typically, whenever a new head coach comes into an NFL organization, he wants to clean house. Like, he wants all of his own guys. If he's going to fail, it's going to be because he did it his way with his players. But he believes that if he does it his way, he'll succeed. And most, I'd say damn near all NFL franchises operate that way. The Chicago Bears do not. The Chicago Bears have a very long, bloody history of coaches and quarterbacks not being in sync with each other. Like, the quarterback that the coach has is not the quarterback that the coach wants. So what I mean by that is whenever a new head coach comes in, he wants to get his own quarterback. Because a quarterback and the head coach are kind of tied at the hip together. Whether or not they're successful or they fail kind of falls on both of those guys. Well, the Bears, because Virginia McCaskey is so cheap, she doesn't want to fire coaches early. So what she'll do is what the Bears will do, the coach will be on the hot seat. So what that means is, the coach might get fired. But because they don't want to fire a coach early, because that costs money, because you have to pay for their buyout, Virginia's very cheap. So she keeps the coach despite the coach being on the hot seat. And then they draft a quarterback. They're like, we're going to keep the coach, but we're going to get a new quarterback. So they draft a quarterback, and then when the first-year quarterback struggles, they fire the head coach. And then the head coach comes in, he's got the previous coach's quarterback, but there's nothing he can do. So it's a lot of instability and dysfunction. Going back to 2017, the Chicago Bears wanted their head coach, John Fox, gone. They kept him for another year. They draft Mitch Trubisky, and John Fox is fired the next year. So then the new head coach comes in. He can't get a new quarterback because they just drafted a quarterback for the previous coach the year before. And they have a history of this. Matt Nagy, their head coach, is on the hot seat. Okay, they keep him because Virginia doesn't want to pay his buyout and fire him early. They draft Justin Fields, quarterback Justin Fields, and then that next year, in Justin Fields' rookie year, they fire the head coach, Matt Nagy. And then, it happened again. Last year, their head coach, Matt Eberflus, was on the hot seat. But, they kept Matt Eberflus, and then they draft quarterback Caleb Williams. And most likely, Matt Eberflus is going to get fired at the end of this year, which means they are going to bring in another new coach, but with the previous regime's quarterback. It's not a recipe for success. It's not a recipe for sustained success in the NFL, because if you're going to get rid of one, you have to get rid of the other. If you want to change quarterbacks, get rid of the head coach and let the new coach draft his own quarterback so that they can both be tied to the hip. All of these quarterbacks are playing for coaches that didn't want them. That's why the Bears haven't been good. They've just been mediocre to bad because they don't understand the importance of the quarterback-coach relationship. Because Virginia is so cheap, she runs the Bears in an incredibly cheap manner, and she doesn't want to pay for coaches to get fired early who she's just going to fire the next year when their contract runs out. Well, I think Caleb Williams is incredibly overhyped. He's quote-unquote a generational talent. The problem with that label is that every 3 or 4 years, we get someone who's quote-unquote a generational talent. We had Zach Wilson, Trevor Lawrence, we've had these quarterbacks come out the last few years of all these NFL draft experts saying, oh, they're generational. I don't think that means what you think it means, bro. People are comparing Caleb Williams to Cam Newton. Cam Newton dominated the SEC. Like, you could see it. He was physically more dominant and imposing than SEC defenders. Like, first-round draft pick type talent defenders. And he ran roughshod over the SEC. Caleb Williams struggled. He never won the Pac-12. Caleb Williams never won the Pac-12. And Cam Newton won a national championship at Auburn. And Auburn doesn't get historically the athletes of Alabama, LSU, Georgia, Tennessee, Florida. Auburn's always kind of been second fiddle, I guess. And Caleb Williams played at USC. USC had elite talent all over the place. Top 10, top 15 recruiting classes. Caleb Williams struggled against all of the best defenses he played and never won the conference. So stop comparing Caleb Williams to Cam Newton. It's insanity. And all it's going to do is leave Bears fans heartbroken. Everyone's comparing Caleb Williams to Patrick Mahomes. I think that's insane. Yes, he has the arm talent. I'm not denying Caleb Williams has talent. But I also think his play style is a lot more similar to that of Johnny Manziel than Patrick Mahomes. When Patrick Mahomes was at Texas Tech, you could see it. He played well against the best teams he played. He lost a freaking shootout, 77-70, against Baker Mayfield in Oklahoma. But he played well in that game. He was the only reason they were even in that game. It was Texas Tech against Oklahoma. Johnny Manziel, at least Johnny Manziel played well against the best teams in the SEC. He beat Alabama. He almost beat Alabama twice. And he would just run around and throw it up to Mike Evans. Caleb Williams played in a much weaker Pac-12. Now, granted, Washington and Oregon and Utah are all good programs and good teams, but they're nothing like the SEC. Now, he was in the Pac-12. Caleb Williams was in the Pac-12. You're dealing with Oregon and Washington and Utah. They're good defenses, but they're not great SEC-level defense like an Alabama or a Georgia or an LSU or an Ohio State. Like, they're not great defenses like by NFL standards. Like, they're good college defenses, but they're not NFL talent level defenses across the board. But against the best defenses he played in his entire college career, the top 25 defenses, he had 5 games against them. He went 78 of 148 for a 51% completion percentage. He threw for 860 yards. Okay. He had 6 touchdowns, but he also threw 6 interceptions. He threw for over 200 yards one time out of 5 games. And he had below a 55% completion percentage in 4 of the 5 games and below a 45% completion percentage in 2 of them. And also he went 2-3 in those games. So against the best defenses he played, he struggled mightily. And that's why I don't buy into Caleb Williams. I think Bears fans are literally like, they're holding out hope for something that's not going to happen. I'll just say this, Bears fans, City of Chicago, I'm now talking directly to you. I feel bad for y'all. No city deserves the kind of quarterback ineptitude that y'all have had to deal with. And I especially feel really bad for y'all because you're being lied to. These people like Nick Wright, Rich Eisen, Chris Brockman, Colin Cowherd, all these media quote-unquote experts who say Caleb Williams is the second coming of football Jesus, they're lying to you. And I personally think it's incredibly irresponsible. But that's the media world we live in today. So bear down and subscribe to the TTT, where you can get actual informed analysis and information on all your favorite players and teams.